Welcome, welcome. We're going to discuss the upcoming enlisted changes today. Chief among them, the new matchmaking system. Now, before we get into it, I think we need to preface this with what exactly Darkflow wanted to accomplish here. I think that there's one particular aspect that a lot of people seem to neglect or forget, and this isn't really pro or fully against the changes that Darkflow is proposing to make. I think some things that they've changed are good. I think some things are not so good. I think that they're not really doing a great job of making a game that will last with this. I think that they're failing to appeal to any one of their naysayers or crowds, and because of that, I don't think they're appealing to any of them, since they're trying to appeal to all of them. So, those three things: number one, they wanted to unify the tech tree. That's one thing that they absolutely have succeeded in. I no longer need to research 3 different MP40s for Berlin, Moscow, and Normandy, and Tunisia, and any new campaign, and on, and on. So that's a good thing. Props to them. Great job. Number 2, they wanted to improve the new player experience. I think that they've potentially failed at that, and part of why they failed at that is because of number 3, and also because I think that they want to also appeal to a crowd of people who prefer historical accuracy. I find myself both in favor of some balancing, but also historical accuracy, so I'm kind of an odd duck. I can see the arguments for both. I think I would have handled things a little bit differently than they did. Now, number 3 is that they wanted to populate their games more. They wanted to have less games that are predominantly populated by AI and more full games. And I think people forget that and neglect that, and I think that's part of why there are so many criticisms with Germany. So, to start off then, if you look at Germany, if you look at the very beginning of Germany, most of them, they can go everywhere. There are very, very few weapons in Germany that only go to, say, Moscow. If you look at the starting rifles, they all can go all the way up to Normandy. Now, there's a little bit of, I guess, lack of clarity. Something that I, from my experience, haven't really been able to sort out. I've heard other people that say that if you put on a full lineup like this, that you can end up in Normandy fighting against late-tier American stuff. And I believe them. My own experience, when I made my current lineup, so these guys can go everywhere. These guys are Moscow and Normandy. These guys are everywhere, except Berlin. But you get the idea, right? Most of these guys, they can pretty much go everywhere. I've only match made into Moscow with this lineup, but I've only run a handful of matches, so, take it with a grain of salt. I think Quadro said that he made it into a Normandy game with a similar lineup, and I believe him. It seems like something that Darkflow would do. So, by that, they're not really fixing the new player experience. Hans over here, who just got his Gewehr 33, who's straight out of the trenches of World War I, who has maybe a grenade and an explosive pack to his name, he's not set to go and fight P-47s and Jumbos in Normandy. I understand that. At the same time, I also acknowledge with the historical crowd that Kar 98s, for example, they were featured pretty much everywhere in the war. So, I get it. But the point that I'm making is that they've completely failed at improving the new player experience, at least with Germany, probably also with Japan. That being said, if you look at point number 3, that they want to populate matches, I understand in the mid-tier why most of the German stuff, see, these can't go to Moscow, can go to Moscow, but remember, these can go all the way up to Berlin. And I think that's the problem here. if you look at War Thunder, you can take a Stug 3, and it's like a 3-7, I think, in realistic, something like that. So you can matchmake up to 4-7, you can matchmake down to 2-7. If you put it on a lineup with Leopard 2A6, you can bring it into 11-7. But the only way to get into 11-7 is to bring it with something else. I think that's where they failed here, but I think that there's a reason for that. And I don't necessarily agree with that reason, but their reason is that Germany is the chief antagonist of this game. Germany has to fight against America, they have to fight against Russia. In the future, when they add France, they have to fight against France. In the future, if they add the British, they have to fight against the British. So you have one nation acting as the common enemy that has to fight everybody. And because of that, the tolerances on Germany as to where they can matchmake up and down to have to be broader if you want to accomplish a matchmaking system where you populate your matches with more human players and less AI. So either there needs to be a concession made in that you can have ahistorical battles where the Americans fight the Russians, for example, or you have to accept that there are going to be more AI in your games, like there are right now. But point number 3 is the key component to why the German tech tree looks the way it does. With all of these things that are, well, not these, but all of these things that can go everywhere. Because otherwise, if it wasn't for that, they could have put Moscow, Tunisia, Stalingrad, and Stalingrad's the cutoff point where if you only have MP40s, and you only have things that cut off at Stalingrad, you won't matchmake higher. But they didn't put a cutoff point. They just said, you as a German, you matchmake against everybody with all of your stuff. And that's entirely because of point 3. If you remove point 3, then you can limit them to Stalingrad, because then you can populate games with more AI, so it doesn't matter if part of your player base is split into high tier and part of your player base is split into middle tier or split into low tier. Like, splitting the player base doesn't matter. If this was me, if I was the one making the new Enlisted, personally, I would have just created the new tech tree so that you'd research your stuff once, but then I would have kept the campaigns the way they are right now. So all of the things that are usable in each campaign, you'd use in each campaign, and you'd pick which campaign you want to matchmake into. So if I want to go fight in Tunisia, I would click on Tunisia, I would go in Tunisia, but when I research stuff, I would just research the whole tech tree. That's how I would do it. It's similar but different to what they did. They basically did that, but they opened up the tolerances on what weapons could go where, at least for Germany, and at the same time they made it so that I can't choose exactly which map I want to go on. I can kind of set it for a preference for Moscow, so I can easily get onto Moscow. I can also easily get into Berlin and Normandy, but there's no way for me to choose between Tunisia and Stalingrad. There's no way for me to set a preference for one or the other. It's really just Normandy, Berlin, or Moscow, and then everything else is a crapshoot, which kind of sucks. I do really like being able to say, hey, you know what, I want to go and fight against Americans, or I want to go and fight against Russians. I don't mind personally that I'm going to fight a lot of AI, and I guess that really comes down to what you want to get out of the game. On the one hand, if you just want a chill experience where you run around and you shoot people, having more AI is a good thing. If you want a hyper-competitive experience, having more AI is a bad thing, because number 1, the AI is dumb, number 2, the AI usually reacts poorly, but number 3, every once in a while the AI just turns around and, like, snapshots you. So it kind of is what it is. So, going back to some of the other issues, the Panthers now can pretty much go everywhere outside of Moscow. That's obviously a negative to the historical crowd. They aren't going to want to see Panthers in Tunisia. They probably don't want to see Panthers in Stalingrad either, but it's at least close enough to when Panthers were fielded that it's less of an issue. I can't remember exactly when the Panthers went into frontline service. Surely not the G, but the A, maybe. I don't remember. It's been a while since I read up on Stalingrad history. But there are other issues when you look at low tier, this will get shown off better when I show Russia, but you can bring the Panzerwerfer, which if you've ever played Normandy, if it gets in a good position, I'm sure you've seen how much damage it can cause. It can go into Moscow. At the same time, the MG-13 squad, let me go and find them. They do have a filter system, so that's nice. Although I wish you could filter for premiums. I think it's these fellas. So these guys are Moscow squad right now on live. The problem is they have the Patron and Trauma magazine. Every gun in the game that has, except for one of the gold weapons, one of the German gold order weapons doesn't, but every other weapon in the game that has a drum mag pays a drum mag tax. These cannot go into Moscow. Likewise, if we look at the Russians, which are probably the other kind of winner, kind of loser, this is a Stalingrad weapon. It can't be used in Stalingrad. This is a Moscow weapon. It can't be used in Moscow or Stalingrad. This is a Stalingrad weapon. It can't be used in Stalingrad. This is a Moscow weapon. It can't be used in Moscow. I'm almost certain that this one is a Moscow weapon. I might be wrong. I'm like 99% sure that's a Moscow weapon. But the moral of the story is the PPD-34 and the PPD-34 with a drum mag are very, very similar weapons. Realistically, if you're going to let rocket artillery into Moscow, that's already destroying your new player haven that you wanted to make. So point 2 is already out the window. You're not improving the new player experience. So then, the next thing is to look at, well, if we want people to use different weapons, and we want there to be diversity and death in our game, then we need to space things out so that people have reasons to use different weapons in different campaigns and in different environments. Okay, well right now, this, all of them, Berlin only. There's an argument for the PPSH, there's an argument for the AS-44. Really good for clearing buildings in close quarters where having the extra capacity is good because you might run into lots of people in a very small space. Very good for versatility when you're shooting across streets. Good reload speed, good damage over range, decent accuracy, not too bad recoil. You get the idea. We're being limited to 2 assault squads, and 2 of every type of squad now. So, realistically, you're going to pick one of these 4 weapons for each of those squads. If you've got the whole tech tree researched, it's always going to be this, and it's always going to be this, or it's always going to be this, and it's always going to be this, or it's always going to be 2 of these, or it's always going to be 2 of these. At no point are you ever going to choose a PPD-40 unless you just want to enjoy a little bit of variety for yourself, because there is no benefit to having a PPD-40 over a PPSH-41. So this, the PPD-34, should go to Moscow. This, the PPD-40, should go to Stalingrad. And this should go to Berlin, because then it creates variety. I don't think that having a 71-round magazine, or in this case drum, versus having a 50 or lower is enough of a difference that it should change whether you're in Moscow, Berlin, or Stalingrad. You're already paying with almost double the reload speed on a PPD-40. Like, there's an advantage if I'm clearing a building to having the drum mag. If I'm shooting across streets, having the PPD-34 is not a substantial loss, because I can duck behind a window for 2.5 seconds and reload the gun. It's not a big deal. Likewise, if you look at Germany, both of the Tigers are in Berlin. That's fine. That makes no problem whatsoever. Tiger 2's being limited to Normandy and Berlin, no biggie. Tiger E's being limited to only Normandy and Berlin, it makes you once again question, why would you bring a Tiger E when you can bring a Tiger 2? It's just going to be better at the same thing. And, okay, obviously, I'm going to acknowledge this. if you're grinding through the tech tree and all you have is a Tiger E, of course you're going to use a Tiger E. But a Tiger E and a Tiger 2P are not the same. It would make more sense for the Tiger E to have different matchmaking than the Tiger 2P. I don't really think that they should be sticking the Tiger E into Tunisia or Moscow. I'm not saying that. But if we're going to take Stalingrad and we're going to change it from being what it is right now, which is semi-authentic, then you may as well just make it the mid-war campaign and stick Tigers and Panthers and IS-1s there. And, you know, maybe Darkflow's going to come out with a brand new campaign, and maybe it'll be like Viborg, or it'll be somewhere along the Finnish border, or it'll be somewhere in 1944 where the Russians are shoving the Germans back into Germany. And then maybe you'll see Tigers and Panthers there, and it'll completely alleviate this issue. But the point that I'm making is that right now, the way that this stands, there's a lot of these higher-end vehicles that, because there's nowhere for them to go other than Berlin and Normandy, that's the only place that they go. And there's a lot of redundancy there because of that. Like the MKB-42, the 43, and the STG. They're all locked to Normandy and Berlin. Right now, you can get these in Moscow. And in Stalingrad. I think it makes a lot of sense to pull them out of Moscow. I don't think they need to go to Tunisia either, but I at least can acknowledge the argument for putting them in Tunisia, because they're going up against things like bars and wars that are going to perform very similar to these. Because effectively what they are just squad automatic weapons, like a bar, but with more ammo and more stability. I understand not putting the MP43 there. These two, absolutely, lock them to Normandy and Berlin. But why would I want to use this in Normandy and Berlin when I can just use these? It's just an oddity. I mean, as far as the middle of the tech tree and as far as everything else goes, I think it's fine. It's just, they clearly haven't created the new player experience that people were asking them for. If they're not going to create the new player experience that people are asking them for, at least create a mid-game and have variety in the mid-game. I think the mortars are another one that are kind of an odd point. Most of these heavier mortars, they're not even heavy mortars, they're medium mortars, were used extensively throughout the war. I think it makes sense to not have them in Moscow, because I think it makes sense to make Moscow your safe new player starting zone. So then I think it makes sense to put them in Tunisia and Stalingrad. I think they're doing okay with all of the anti-tank weapons. I think being a tank player is potentially going to be more difficult than it used to be, because most of the anti-tank weapons, this isn't unique to Germany, are going to be available almost everywhere. See, Stalingrad, Berlin. You can even get Panzerfausts as the Russians before the Germans get them. Because look. Oh wait, no, I'm wrong. I was clicked on the Offenrohr. Okay, so you can get Panzerfausts for both sides in Moscow. So being a tanker is going to be a lot more hostile than it is right now. Because right now, if you're playing Stalingrad, or if you're playing Moscow, or for most of the campaign, if you're playing in Tunisia, you're limited to anti-tank rifles, which are really cool, don't get me wrong. But having these everywhere is it's gonna be good for infantry. It's gonna be good for countering gray zone camping tanks, because you'll have something powerful that can reach out and touch them. You know, assuming that you can aim a Panzerfaust well, but it's got sights that go out to like 90 meters, I think, 80 or 90. But the point here is, dealing with tanks is going to be a lot easier. That's probably a good thing. But if our goal is to create a safer place for new players to learn the game and not be squished, putting rocket artillery there doesn't really make sense. Putting Panzerfausts is arguable. Obviously, it's going to take you a while to research up to here, so it's not really going to affect new players fighting against tanks, but the new player who just started the game, who's driving his Panzer IIc, or his Italian vehicles, it's going to affect them because Johnny over here is going to come running out with his Panzerfaust 60 with his Russian, I don't know, assault squad, I guess. And your Panzer 3C or 2C is just going to get deleted. So, if that was your goal, to make a better starting experience for them, then I think you failed. And if that's your argument for putting the drum mags higher on everything that gets a drum mag, then I think that you're focusing on the wrong point. People use the drum mags as an argument because it's an easy argument. But then when you actually look at this tech tree, the only thing that they've taken and moved up are the drum mags. I mean, there's a few other things, like some of the machine guns, right? Like the Fedorov is a Moscow weapon right now. It's not a Moscow weapon anymore. It's a little bit concerning because there's a sale going on right now, and this is still actively being sold as a Moscow Premium Squad. And it is a Moscow Premium Squad right now. I'm not saying they're lying. But if this change goes through, then you're going to get people who just bought this in the most recent sale that are going to end up with their Moscow Premium Squad that can no longer play in Moscow. With their Moscow outfits that are no longer in Moscow. So, it's questionable. As far as the Americans go, I do think the Americans are probably the gold standard of what a tech tree should look like. They have things early on that are Pacific only. They have a lot of things that are Pacific only, where if you just put them on, you're only going to matchmake into the Pacific. They have a lot of stuff in the middle that matchmakes pretty much everywhere, which, again, I think debatable, having Normandy. I think that if we went by my system where you have early tier, mid-tier, late tier, or early war, mid-war, late war, then you would have had things down here with P, things in 2 and 3 with T, and things in 4 and 5 with N. But with what we have in the game, with the system that Darkflow's chosen to adopt, I think that this works. I think the drum mag being locked to Normandy is questionable. It's a Tunisian weapon right now in game. The Germans are getting Panthers in Tunisia. I think that it would be acceptable because it's basically this Thompson with a drum mag. I think it would be acceptable to have this in Tunisia. I think you should keep it out of the Pacific. I think that the main points of contention with this tree are that the Jumbo and the Calliope are both going to the Pacific and Tunisia. And the Jumbo should never have left Normandy. Realistically, you're going to see people bring 2 squads of Jumbos to the Pacific, and the Japanese don't really have an answer to that. It really should not be that way. Now, they did well with the P-47. It's staying in Normandy. But I think you could make an argument for sending the M18 to the Pacific. I mean, right now, they call it the Pacific, the maps are Guadalcanal, the Japanese equipment is largely early war. I think that they're turning the Pacific into a catch-all for the entire Pacific War, which, okay, fine. Add more maps, give the Japanese more equipment, sure, why not? But Jumbos don't belong in the Pacific. Churchill 3s probably should not be in the Pacific. I don't know the force breakdown of Australian and British forces that were deployed into India and Australia and their holdings in the Pacific. I could see them having Crusaders or potentially Grants out there. So, okay, fine, I guess. It makes sense with all the tropical variants. They were literally designed to deal with adverse weather conditions, plus none of these planes are so oppressively powerful that they shouldn't be there. I mean, you are going to get M8 rockets there, but we already have the FP5 with HVARs and napalm. We're getting the A20 there. It's 400 or 500 pound bombs versus, I think this is not that one, this one that has 1000. So yeah, it's more bomb weight, but ultimately it probably won't make a huge difference. I appreciate that the Firefly's going to Normandy. I really think that the Calliope, you could make an argument for sending it to Tunisia. The Jumbo should not be in Tunisia, and it should not be in the Pacific. It should stay in Normandy. I would be happier, and I wouldn't be complaining if it was in Tunisia, but it should not be in the Pacific. Other than that, though, I think that they've done an excellent job here. Everything here and back, more or less, Tunisia, Pacific, fine. Even the American larger mortars pretty much go everywhere, which really begs the question why the Russian German ones are locked to Normandy and Berlin. But actually, I should double check that on the Russian one. I know that the Russian one is, the German one is also Normandy, Berlin, no Tunisia, which seems odd. I understand kind of why the Panther Gs are in Stalingrad and Tunisia, given how all of the other German weapons seem to matchmake everywhere, and I think that's a concession that they made to them because they're everybody's bad guy. But then, if you go and you look at Japan, the D4Y is going to probably be their premier counter to American tanks now in the Pacific, and they're going to need it, because I don't think the Chinook is going to stand up. I know you can, and I have killed Jumbos with Pumas on many occasions. You can shoot through the machine gun port. I just don't think relying on the machine gun port is enough to merit putting the Jumbo against all of these. Because this you can machine gun people out of, or you can flame people out of. These are paper thin. This is an amphibious tank. I mean, the Honey is alright, but it's not going to stand up to a Jumbo. This is, again, open top, so it's not going to stand up to a Jumbo. This is the most exciting vehicle in the upcoming patch for me. They said it has a 10-second reload, and the Chi-Ha shotgun in War Thunder is absolutely a joy. Hopefully it'll be good at killing infantry, because otherwise I think Japan, I don't think currently is in as bad of a position as people make them out to be. I actually really like the Hiei rifle. Even though it's only a 5-round mag, I don't think it's substantially worse than a Grand. I've had fine experiences with it. I think a lot of their submachine guns perform very well. So, their machine guns could use a little bit of work. I think the Type 99 will probably help fix some of the issues that they run into. Yeah. I mean, I don't think that they're in a terrible position. See, 80 mils of pen, you could probably deal with a jump, well, definitely from the sides, but I think the Jumbo is going to be a very difficult nut to crack, and the problem with the Jumbo is, from a balance perspective, it doesn't make sense to be here. From a historical perspective, it doesn't make sense to be here. The only way it makes sense to be here is if you want to appease people, I mean, like me, who own the premium Jumbo. But the thing is, it's not exclusive to the premium Jumbo. It's both of the Jumbos. They're both able to go everywhere, and that seems like a mistake to me. It's like, I have the premium Jumbo. As somebody who has premium stuff, I'm telling you, keep it out of the Pacific. It doesn't belong there. But yeah, other than that, I think America's in a pretty good spot. I think Japan is probably coming out the worst, but it's mostly because of the power of the American lineups you can bring there. So, for example, this is a lineup that I threw together. I match-made into the Pacific with it. Obviously, it can go other places because American stuff mostly matchmakes everywhere, but I don't care if you put me in Normandy or Tunisia or in the Pacific, and I understand this is all a premium lineup, so, you know, it is what it is. But I can bring a squad of Colt monitors, which are essentially better bars. I can bring the Turner SMLE radio squad, which I think is one of the best premium squads in the game. You can bring the premium flamethrowers. You can bring the Jumbo, and you can bring, obviously, the FP3, because it's from the Pacific, and these guys, I just threw them on for funsies, just to round out the lineup. But you can bring all of this to the Pacific. This is a disgusting lineup to have to fight as Japan. Like, HVARs are honestly some of the best cast weapons in the game. The Jumbo, while it might not be able to handle the terrain super well, is going to be really hard to kill. These guys are great for defending objectives. These guys are great for attacking and defending objectives. These guys are great all-rounders. These guys are great all-rounders. And, like, if you look at Japan, what's the Japanese answer to this? We've got the mid at best tank that we started with. I actually think the Chiha's pretty good. I've got a friend that has it. I've driven his. It performs pretty decently. And then there's this squad, and there's the medics. Are these the medics or the paratroopers? Okay, so this is the assault squad. There's also a medic squad that has SMGs, and then there's also the paratroopers here. So don't get me wrong, like, those three to start with aren't bad. Throwing on this plane or this plane also wouldn't be bad, but that's assuming that you have, you know, the premium plane or you have the event plane, which I do not. I was away during that event. But we're talking about two SMG teams that are going to be pretty alright. They're good. They're not terrible. You know, I think they're pretty average. Potentially a plane, potentially a tank, although I don't think the Chiha can stand up to a Jumbo. I just don't think that the Japanese have what it takes to fight all of the stuff that the Americans can bring into the Pacific. Like, if you really wanted to, right? Let's say you have like a 10-slot lineup, so you have more slots to flex for vehicles, right? You could theoretically bring a Calliope, a Jumbo, and you could bring a Churchill, right? And I think it's 2 vehicle squads base, and then if you've got 10 slots, you can go up to 4. So, alright, why not throw the plane on 2? Okay? So you've got 3 really powerful tanks and a plane that you can just sit there and rotate through. What's the Japanese answer to that? The D4 that they get all the way at the end of their tech tree? Let's see, what do you get? You get 2 little itty-bitty bombs, so not really an answer. The D4Y is probably the Japanese answer to American armor. And the Zeros, whether it's this one, or the Key 61, or the premium Key 61, those are probably the answer to the American planes. But that requires you to either have premium or be halfway through the tree. If having, again, if point 3 is an important reason for this update by Darkflow to get more people, human players, into matches, then they're going to fail, because people are going to take 2 looks at Japan, they'll play them once, and then they'll say, nah, I'm not going to play Japan anymore, it's not worth it, and we're going to end up with the Pacific being the way it is right now, where either you have people playing America and it's a steamroll, or people playing Japan and it's a steamroll, and the rest of the time there's no one playing Japan and it's all AIs and it's all bots. So, if getting more human players into games is your goal, you are not getting more Japanese players with this. I think if you pull the Calliope and the Jumbo And maybe you leave the Churchill, maybe you don't. The Churchill's not that good. But it's still got a lot of armor. But if you pull the Calliope and the Jumbo out, and you either keep the M18 out or you put it in, I think you could put it in if you need something to put in. Then fine. I think gun-wise, the Japanese, with submachine guns, they can compete. I think with rifles, with the Hiei and with the Type 4, I think they can compete. I mean, luckily they kept this out of the Pacific, right? I think the biggest shortfalls for the Japanese are their lack of good machine guns, which they're getting better. I don't like having the long-range sight on that, but they're getting better. They might be able to compete with the bar. I haven't really played around a whole lot with, I forgot which one of these two is actually in the game right now and which one's coming out next update. I thought the Type 99 was the one coming out next update and the Type 96 was the one we currently have. But anyway, I think that they're alright there. I think they're alright with their AT weapons in respect to what the Americans currently have in the campaign. And I think their flamethrower is respectable. Like, I was saying that the Tunisian premium flamethrowers are going to be really strong. It's because there's 4 of them. It's not because of the type of flamethrower they have. Like, the Japanese get access to a long-range flamethrower, so it isn't the end of the world. But when they're going to be fighting into American armor like these, I think that people are not going to want to play Japan. At least not any more than they already want to. So to round things out, I would like to see more diversity in middle high tier with regard to weapons for Russia and Germany in particular. I think the Americans are probably the gold standard of what this update should look like, but I think certain vehicles that they have need to be adjusted because they're going to be oppressive in certain environments. Also, from a historical standpoint, I'd like to see this in more campaigns. I understand balance-wise why they might not want to, but comparing it to like an MG34 or an MG42, I think it would be okay to have this in Tunisia. I think it would be fine there. I understand keeping it out of the Pacific. On a side note, with the mortars, my buddy and I were talking about this the other day. People don't really play them a whole lot. I think that they would see a lot more play. Well, maybe not a lot more play, but I think they would see at least a little bit more play. Same with AT squads. If Gaijin or Darkflow took a similar approach to what they did with machine guns and flamethrower teams, and let mortar engineers build 120mm heavy mortar pits, and let AT squads build heavier AT guns. So, for example, for the Germans, maybe a PaK 43 or one of the anti-air 88mm cannons. You could find alternatives for the other factions as well, but being able to do something like that might see them get more play. Right now, they're cool, but they either require team coordination with people giving you active marks, so you need friends to play with that are reliable, or you need to already know the approaches to the various objectives and their ranges from wherever you're going to set up. So I think because they're kind of cumbersome to use, you don't really see them. And then likewise for AT squads, you really just need the one AT guy in like your assault squad or your machine gun team or wherever, right? I don't think there's a whole lot of point to having a dedicated AT squad unless you're Japan going into the next update. So having a heavier AT structure that you can build, I think would make a lot of sense. I'm thinking back to like the old Company of Heroes games where certain factions, if you took certain command traits, would let you build heavier dug-in positions. Like the British had a 24-pounder artillery piece, or I think the Germans could build PaK 43s, etc., etc. I think that there's potential there for something. But yeah, leave your feedback below. I appreciate hearing people's criticism to me. If you disagree with me, let me know. More importantly, if you disagree or if you agree with the changes, go over to the Darkflow forums for Enlisted and let them know. They've pretty much made it sound like this update is coming within a week or two of the anniversary ending. And if it comes in the current state, I mean, yeah, it's going to be playable. I'll still play it, but I think a lot of people are going to be unhappy with it. A lot of people, I think, have expectations of what the merge is going to be that aren't being met. Maybe try to convince them to rethink a BR system. Maybe try to convince them to only adopt the tech tree and keep the current campaign system. Admittedly, I think that makes a lot of sense since they're not improving the new player experience with this, and at least with Japan, they're not improving the amount of human players on the team. So if they're already failing with 2 of their points, why bother? Just put in the tech tree and call it a day. But yeah, thanks for watching. Enjoy. Go out and kick the crap out of your enemies in Enlisted.